The Atlantic didn't welcome Gabriel, it tolerated him. On the deck of his aging trawler, the Obsidian, Gabriel went through the ritual he had performed 10,000 times before. He checked the seals on his heavy-duty Mark V composite suitor's guard, matte black armor that bore the deep gouges of coral reefs and the precedents of 1,000 descents. His hands, gnarled and stained by grease and brine, moved with a slow, agonizing precision. He wasn't like the young tech divers from the corporations. He didn't use sleek, lightweight gear. Gabriel trusted only the weight. He strapped on his lead-weighted boots, each one weighing 20 pounds, and adjusted the bronze collar of his helmet. To him, this wasn't equipment. It was a sarcophagus that allowed him to visit the dead. "Just one more time," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. He wasn't talking to himself. He was talking to the abyss. He stepped off the dive platform, and for a fleeting second, the world of light and air vanished, replaced by the violent, bubbling embrace of the cold sea. The first 30 meters were easy. Sunlight still danced in shards of emerald and sapphire, and the schools of silver dace flickered like spilled coins. But as Gabriel descended, the colors began to bleed away. First the red, then the yellow, until everything became a monochromatic shade of ink. He watched his depth gauge. 40 meters, 50, 60. Here, the silence began to take on a physical weight. It wasn't the absence of sound, but the presence of something ancient. The only thing Gabriel could hear was the frantic thumping of his own heart and the mechanical clunk hiss of the air scrubbers. Every breath tasted of dry rubber and recycled metal. He felt the suit press inward, the titanium-reinforced joints groaning under the increasing weight of the water column. He was no longer a man. He was a tiny bubble of stubborn life suspended in a world that wanted him crushed. At 80 meters, Gabriel reached the shelf, the Bermuda drop, below him. The seabed plummeted into a vertical darkness that no sun had ever touched. He checked the wrist-mounted sonar display. The green needle was erratic, jumping between infinity and zero. "Come on, old girl," he grunted, tapping the glass. "Don't fail me now." Suddenly, the sonar stabilized. It painted a shape that made Gabriel's blood run colder than the surrounding water. It wasn't a wreck. It wasn't a rock formation. It was a perfect geometric circular crater nearly 300 feet across, carved into the tectonic plate with surgical precision. And in the center of that crater, something was emitting a low-frequency hum. It was a sound so deep it didn't enter his ears. It vibrated through his bones, through the very marrow of his skeleton. It felt like a call, a beckoning from a ghost he had spent his life trying to find. Gabriel switched on his high-intensity halogen floodlights. The twin beams sliced through the silt, illuminating a sight that defied every law of marine biology. A colossal glass dome sat at the bottom of the crater. It was translucent, shimmering with an internal pearlescent light. There was no silt on its surface, no barnacles, no polyps. It was as if the ocean itself was afraid to touch it. As Gabriel drifted closer, his lead boots finally touching the rim of the crater, He saw the detail. The dome was etched with patterns that looked like clockwork gears within gears frozen in the glass. He approached the structure, reaching out a gloved hand. The moment his fingertips made contact, the hum stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. The bubbles from his exhaust valve didn't sound like bubbles anymore. They sounded like shattering crystal. He found the airlocker, massive, hexagonal iris made of a dull, non-reflective metal. It didn't look like human engineering. It looked like a biological valve, a throat ready to swallow. Without hesitating, Gabriel stepped inside. He had spent his life looking for an exit from the world above, and this felt like the only door left. The outer gates hissed shut, and the sound of the ocean was replaced by a violent, screaming vacuum as the water was pumped out. The pressure in Gabriel's suit equalized with a bone-cracking pop. The inner doors slid open, and Gabriel stumbled out, falling onto a surface that felt like warm, sun-baked cobblestone. He scrambled to unlock his helmet, his lungs burning. As the helmet came off, he didn't smell salt. He smelled the dry, sweet scent of old libraries and the ozone of a summer storm. He stood up, shaking, and looked out at a town square that shouldn't exist, a perfect, silent replica of his childhood home, sheltered beneath a sky made of 1 billion tons of restless emerald sea. Gabriel stood at the threshold of the airlock, his heavy bronze helmet cradled in the crook of his arm like the severed head of a mechanical god. For the first time in 30 years, the air he breathed didn't taste of pressurized tanks or stale rubber. It was sweet. It was terrifyingly fresh. He took a step forward, his lead-weighted boots clattering against cobblestones that looked like they had been hand-polished by 1,000 years of tides. He was in the center of a town square that shouldn't exist. It was a perfect crystalline mirror of Oakhaven, the fishing village where he had spent his youth, a place that had been leveled by a hurricane 2 decades ago. But here there was no rot, no salty roded wood. The white picket fences were blindingly bright, and the flower beds were bursting with hydrangeas that looked like they were made of silk and light. Above him, instead of a sun, the emerald weight of the Atlantic Ocean churned behind the shimmering dome, casting moving shadows that looked like giant liquid fingers stroking the roofs of the houses. As Gabriel walked deeper into the town, the silence began to scream. It was a vacuum of sound that his mind struggled to fill. He reached the main street, and then he saw them, the inhabitants. They didn't notice him. They didn't notice anything. A young girl sat on a porch, playing with a wooden doll that had been snapped in half. Gabriel watched, his breath hitching in his throat as the girl moved her hands. She didn't repair the toy. The toy simply unbroke. The splintered wood fused back together. The paint flowed back onto the surface, and the doll became brand new in her palms. She laughed, but the sound reached Gabriel's ears in a distorted reverse echo. Further down the road, he saw old men sitting on a bench. As he watched, the deep furrows in their brows smoothed out. Their gray hair darkened to a rich chestnut right before his eyes. It was like watching a film being played backward, but the film was reality itself. "This isn't a city," Gabriel whispered, his fingers trembling as he touched the cold, perfect stone of a lamppost. "It's a graveyard for things that haven't happened yet." Every step Gabriel took felt heavier, as if the gravity of the city was tied to his own regrets. He found himself standing in front of the town's notice board. It was made of dark oak, untouched by time. There, pinned to the cork, were hundreds of small brass plates. Each one bore a name and a number. He leaned in, his eyes stinging. Julia, 15 years of silence. Marcus, 4,000 days of unfinished dreams. Greater than he realized then, that the buildings weren't made of stone and mortar. They were built from the hours people had thrown away. Every hour someone had spent staring at a wall in despair. Every year lost to an addiction. Every minute wasted in a job they hated. It all flowed down here into the Bermuda Shelf to be processed into this terrifying, beautiful architecture. He looked at his own, hand-scarred, calloused, and old. He was the only thing in this city that was decaying. He was a glitch in a world of perfection. He turned a corner and stopped dead. There, on a bench near the harbor that led to a sea of glass, sat a man. He was wearing a faded denim jacket, the one Gabriel had lost in a bar fight in 1986. The man was holding a bottle of beer, watching the emerald light of the ocean sky with a carefree grin. It was him. Not the Gabriel who had spent 30 years hiding in the dark, but the Gabriel who still believed the world was worth winning. This younger version looked up, and for a split second, their eyes met. The younger Gabriel's smile didn't falter, but his eyes were hollow, filled with a golden, swirling dust. "You're late," a voice rasped from the shadows behind him. Gabriel spun around, reaching for a dive knife that was no longer there. Standing in the doorway of a clock shop was a figure clad in a copper diving suit from the 1800s. The massive porthole of the helmet was dark, but a faint, rhythmic ticking came from within the chest plate. The archive has been waiting for its most loyal contributor. "Welcome home, Gabriel. Would you like to see where we kept your 30s? Gabriel stood frozen, his heavy boots rooted to the cobblestones. 10 feet away sat the ghost of his own life. The younger Gabriel, let's call him Gabe, looked barely 25. He was leaning back on the bench, his denim jacket stained with oil and salt, a cigarette unlit between his fingers. He looked like a man who owned the horizon, not a man who had spent 30 years hiding beneath it. The air between them hummed with a sick, static energy. Gabriel smelled the stale beer Gabe was holding, mixed with the haunting scent of a perfume his first wife used to wear, a smell that had been erased from his memory by decades of diesel fumes and sea salt. "Look at him." The archivist's voice drifted from the clock shop, sounding like dry leaves skittering on a grave. "He is every choice you didn't make. Every yes you turned into a no. He is the masterpiece you painted with the hours you threw away." Gabriel's heart felt like a trapped animal. He looked at his own scarred, arthritic knuckles, and then at the smooth, strong hands of the boy on the bench. The envy was a physical pain, sharper than any decompression sickness. The Archivist stepped out from the shadows, his antique copper suit glinting with a sickly yellow light. He didn't walk. He moved as if he were being pulled by invisible wires. Through the dark glass of his helmet, Gabriel could see nothing but the reflection of the emerald sea above. Time is the only currency the ocean accepts, Gabriel, the Archivist hissed. If you want that man's strength, you must tear it from the foundation of this city. But beware, time is not a liquid. It is a jagged glass. To pour it from one vessel to another, you must be prepared to bleed. If you take his youth, you take his ignorance. If you take his heart, you take his pain. And the city will not survive the theft. This bubble exists on the balance of what was lost. If you find it again, the balance shatters. Gabriel didn't care. The sight of his younger selves, so vibrant, so unburdened, was a drug. He took a step forward, his hand reaching out like a beggar reaching for gold. Gabriel's fingers brushed Gabe's shoulder. The moment of contact was like a lightning strike. A blinding flash of gold light erupted from the point of touch, and Gabriel's world turned into a screaming vortex of memories. He felt his spine snap straight with a bone-chilling crack. He felt his skin tighten, the deep furrows of 30 years of salt and sorrow smoothing out in an instant. The pain was exquisite, 1,000 needles of fire stitching his muscles back into their prime. But as he transformed, Gabe began to unravel. The young man on the bench didn't scream. He simply dissolved into a swirling cloud of glowing golden dust that began to pour into Gabriel's mouth and eyes, and then the first sound of the end arrived. A high-pitched crystalline ping that echoed through the town square. Gabriel looked up. A spiderweb of white fractures had appeared on the great dome. The emerald weight of the Atlantic surged against the glass, sensing a weakness. The city of lost hours began to groan, its buildings shivering as if they were made of sand. The Archivist began to laugh, a hollow, mechanical sound that was drowned out by the roar of the sea. "The theft is complete!" He shrieked as his copper suit began to flake away into sea foam. "The ocean hates a vacuum, Gabriel. You have your youth, but you are miles beneath the world where it belongs. Run, little thief, run before the sky falls." A massive shard of glass, the size of a house, broke free from the ceiling and crashed into the harbor, sending a wave of cobblestones and golden dust into the air. The smell of grass was gone, replaced by the terrifying metallic scent of deep-sea brine. Gabriel looked at his hands. They were strong, powerful, and young, but he was trapped in a dying dream. The streets were buckling. The houses were melting back into the shadows of the abyss. Water began to spray from the cracks in the walls, cold as a scalpel. Gabriel turned and ran toward the airlock, but every step he took in his new, powerful body felt like he was running through thickening tar. The ocean wasn't just coming for the city. It was coming for the time he had just stolen. The dome didn't just break, it detonated. Above the town square, a shard of glass the size of a freighter snapped under the weight of the Atlantic, and 1 trillion tons of water found its first entry point. It hit the ground not as a wave, but as a solid pillar of destruction, obliterating the town hall in a second. Gabriel felt the impact in his very teeth. His new young legs propelled him forward with a speed his mind couldn't quite process. For 30 years his body had been a slow, aching machine. Now he was a predator. But the physics of the city were failing. The cobblestones were liquefying into gray silt, and the beautiful white houses were folding like wet cardboard. "Run!" he screamed, though there was no one left to hear him. The Archivist had vanished, leaving only his copper helmet bobbing in a rising tide of black brine. Gabriel looked back once and saw the bench, the place where he had stolen his life, disappear under a wall of churning foam. As Gabriel sprinted toward the airlock, the city began to play its final cruel trick. The unliving people he had seen earlier, the girl with the doll, the old men on the bench, weren't running for their lives. They were standing still, their skin turning into a translucent, golden mist. As the water touched them, they didn't drown. They shattered like glass statues. Gabriel ducked into an alleyway as a massive church bell, dislodged from its tower, came crashing through a roof just inches from his head. The air was thickening with the scent of ancient salt and rotted kelp. The emerald light of the dome was flickering out, replaced by the terrifying natural darkness of the abyss. Every time his boots hit the ground, he felt a jolt of stolen energy, a golden spark that reminded him he was young, but also reminded him that he was a thief. The city was dying because of him. He was running through the guts of his own regret, and the ocean was the scalpel coming to cut it out. Suddenly, Gabriel stumbled. A sharp, searing pain shot through his chest, a phantom ache from his old, withered heart. The stolen time was resisting. It wasn't just a gift. It was a parasite. He saw flashes of his older self, the wrinkled hands, the gray beard flickering over his young skin like a glitch in a film. The water was at his waist now, and it was lethally cold. In the darkness he could see the hexagonal glow of the airlock still 200 yards away, but the path was blocked. A row of houses had collapsed into the street, creating a jagged dam of timber and stone. Gabriel had to climb. He grabbed a splintered beam, his young muscles bulging, and hauled himself up. Above him, the ceiling of the dome was a map of white fire, millions of cracks spreading in every direction. One more big breach, and the entire city would be erased in a single heartbeat. "Not yet," Gabriel hissed, his teeth chattering from the cold. "I didn't steal this life just to leave it at the bottom of a hole." He reached the airlock just as the final, catastrophic failure began. A sound like 1,000 freight trains filled the air. The dome's crown gave way. Gabriel dove through the hexagonal iris of the gate, his hands scrambling for the manual override. He looked back through the thickening water and saw the Archivist's clock shop implode. Thousands of golden watch faces spinning into the dark like stars in a dying galaxy. He slammed the lever down. The heavy metal doors groaned, fighting against the incoming pressure, moving with agonizing slowness. A jet of high-pressure water nearly took his head off as the seal began to close. With a final bone-crushing thud, the doors locked. Gabriel was in total darkness, the sound of the ocean reduced to a muffled, predatory growl outside the thick steel walls. He was safe for now, but he was trapped in a young body, in a sinking airlock with no air, and his old dive suit miles away in the debris. The real fight for survival was only just beginning. Gabriel slammed the airlock door shut, the massive metal iris ceiling with a heavy, predatory thud. The sudden silence inside the tiny hexagonal chamber was more terrifying than the roar of the collapsing city. It was total darkness. Then a flicker. A failing emergency panel erupted in a series of dying orange sparks, casting jittery shadows across his face. He was trapped, not in the city, but in a sinking tomb of iron. Outside, the water level was rising with impossible speed. Through a small, thick glass porthole, he could see the last vestiges of Oakhaven. The great Clockwork dome, which just moments ago held back the sky, was shattering. The beautiful neoclassical architecture, including the town hall he just scrambled from, was folding like wet cardboard under the weight of the Atlantic. The emerald light of the city was dying, replaced by the suffocating natural darkness of the abyss. The ocean hadn't just come for the city, it was coming for the time he had stolen. Gabriel slid down the freezing metal wall, his new young legs propulsioning him only toward despair. For 30 years, his body had been a slow, aching machine. Now he was a predator trapped in a cage, but the stolen time was a heavy weight. He felt it not as a gift, but as a parasite. He saw flashes of his older self, the wrinkled hands, the gray beard flickering over his young skin like a glitch in a film. The air in the airlock was thickening with the scent of ancient salt and rotted kelp. Water began to spray from the cracks in the ceiling, a lethal, high-pressure mist that cut like a scalpel. Every breath felt like inhaling fire. He realized he didn't just steal his youth. He stole his chance to fix things. He was alone, miles beneath the world where his life belonged, with no suit and no air. The Archivist's voice drifted back to him. "Run, little thief! The ocean hates a vacuum." And the vacuum was closing. Suddenly, the chamber sloped violently. The entire harbor section of the city, including the airlock, was being dislodged from the seabed and sinking into the deeper trench. Gabriel was thrown against the door, his young shoulder bulging as he grabbed the manual override wheel. It was frozen. He looked at his hands, young and strong, but he was missing his true armor. His mind flashed back to image_69.png. Single quotes, aftermath, the town hall collapse. He had lost his primary atmosphere suit in the debris of the grand staircase. He had lost his real body's final heavy protection. Now he was naked, exposed to the killing pressure that was clawing at the thick steel walls. He tried to swim toward the logic, to think of a plan, but his own heart was screaming a primal tempo of panic. The city was dying, and its ghost was trapped in here with him. He reached for the override again, his young knuckles white with effort. He wouldn't give up. Not after what he did to Oakhaven, to Gabe, to himself. He needed to find his suit. He must find the main salvage depot, or a deep-sea harbor. He decided to fight, even with no plan. He didn't just steal this life to leave it at the bottom of a hole. As he made the decision, a final catastrophic failure began. A sound like 1,000 freight trains filled the water outside. The town hall harbor gave way. Gabriel dove through the airlock, but the ocean wasn't just coming for the city, it was coming for him. The hexagonal gate opened not into freedom, but into the Drava Huabina. With a final crushing thud, the city's last bubble exploded, and Gabriel was in the water without a suit, face to face with the abyss. The ocean hit him like a falling mountain. In the instant the airlock disintegrated, Gabriel wasn't just in water. He was in the grip of a god. The pressure at 800 feet is not a concept, is a physical hatred. His young, stolen lungs screamed as the last pocket of air was ripped from his chest. He was drifting in the absolute dark, surrounded by the invisible debris of a world that no longer existed. Below him, the Bermuda Shelf was a graveyard of golden sparks, the remains of Oakhaven sinking into the silt of eternity. Gabriel's vision began to tunnel. The edges of his mind were fraying. He saw her then, Julia, not as a ghost, but as a pulse of light in the dark. She wasn't calling him to the city. She was pointing upward. But between Gabriel and the surface lay a vertical mile of lethal, freezing water. His young muscles, though powerful, were useless against the vacuum of the abyss. He was a god of a dead city, and he was about to drown in his own victory. His hand, clawing through the dark, struck something cold, hard, mechanical. Through the haze of nitrogen narcosis, he recognized the shape. It was the Mark V atmospheric suit, his original shell. It had been ejected from the radness as it collapsed and was now sinking slowly beside him. It was his only hope and his certain prison. Gabriel scrambled for the hatch, his fingers slipping on the slime-covered bronze. With a roar of silent agony, he hauled himself inside the iron torso. He slammed the helmet shut just as the pressure began to crush his ribs. He fumbled for the oxygen valve. Hiss. The first breath of recycled metallic air felt like a miracle. But as the suit's internal lights flickered on, he saw his reflection in the small, scratched porthole. The golden dust he had swallowed in the city was starting to seep out of his pores. It danced in the air of the helmet like tiny dying stars. The ocean was reclaiming its debt. The vacuum inside the suit was fighting the stolen time outside. He began the ascent. The winch on his ship far above, still tethered to the suit's emergency line, began to groan as it pulled him toward the light. But the higher he went, the more the pain intensified. It wasn't the pressure of the water anymore. It was the pressure of the years. Each foot of ascent felt like a decade returning to his bones. He watched, helpless, as his smooth young hands began to wither inside the diving gloves. The golden light was bleeding out of him, flowing into the dark water through the suit's exhaust valves. He felt his spine curve once more. He felt the familiar heavy ache return to his joints. He was losing Gabe. He was losing the denim jacket, the strength, the unwritten future. He screamed Julia's name, but his voice was changing, thinning, cracking, becoming the rasp of an old man again. "You can't keep it," the Archivist's voice seemed to echo in the vibration of the metal. "You can only visit. No one lives in the archive. They only pay for the ticket." The suit broke the surface of the Atlantic just as the sun began to bleed over the horizon. The rescue crew on the Sea Wraith hauled the heavy Iron Man onto the deck with a cacophony of shouting and clanking chains. When they finally unscrewed the helmet, they didn't find a young hero. They found Gabriel. He lay on the wet wood of the deck, gasping, his beard white with sea salt, his eyes filled with a terrifying ancient wisdom. He looked at his hands. They were old, scarred, and trembling. But he was breathing. The golden dust was gone, vanished into the depths, leaving only a faint, metallic taste on his tongue. He looked out over the calm, blue water. Somewhere down there, Oakhaven was still sinking, a city made of hours he would never get back. He reached into his pocket and found a single small brass gear that shouldn't have been there. It wasn't moving, but it was warm. Gabriel closed his eyes, the sound of the real world, the wind, the gulls, the heartbeat of the living, finally drowning out the ticking of the abyss. He hadn't saved his youth, he had saved his soul. And for the first time in 30 years, Gabriel wasn't afraid of the time he had left.